Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this seminar series organized by the Empathic Computing Laboratory. I'm your host, Aladdin, and our guest speaker for today is Fannie Liu, who is currently a VP at JP Morgan Chase, leading the AR/VR research team, and previously worked at Snap and LinkedIn. Her research interests include social computing, physiological sensing, and HCI. She completed her PhD from CMU, and her work was published at CHI, CSCW, and IMWhat. The title of the talk is Fostering Social Connection over Technology. The talk will be roughly an hour and followed by brief questions and answers. Please join me to welcome Dr. Fannie Liu to the talk. Thank you for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Aladdin. Really excited to be here. So as Aladdin mentioned, I am currently at JP Morgan as a VP Applied Research Lead. I actually joined about 2 months ago, but I'll be talking about work I did prior to joining when I was at Snap Research as a research scientist, as well as during my PhD at CMU. And so this is about fostering social connection over technology. And I'll just start by saying that social connection is essential to our lives. It's our sense of having close and positive relationships with other people. And given that humans are social creatures, this is very important for our happiness and our well-being. In today's world, we connect to each other more often through technology than not, ranging from our interpersonal interactions to our workplace collaborations and so on. But while technology can help us connect and communicate with more people, it can be hard to make meaningful connection with them. For example, we have this kind of a Zoom setup where I can only see currently 5 boxes max on the top. So I can only see so many of your faces and your expressions, and that's only the faces. I can't even see like your body movements and so on. And probably likewise for you as well, since I'm sharing my screen. And so these kind of issues are actually called cues filtered out theories, where this lack of social cues, like our facial expressions or our body gestures over technology, can actually hurt our feelings of connection with each other. And indeed, among all these issues, our world is facing a social disconnection problem, where over the last several years, polarization, for example, has been highlighted as a global risk. Nations like the US have been found to have an empathy deficit, with young people in particular being shown as less empathetic. And finally, health organizations have identified a loneliness epidemic, which has only gotten worse with the COVID pandemic and has major implications on our physical and our mental health, and therefore our overall lives. So it's really crucial that we can find new ways for us to connect, and particularly to address these problems by leveraging the affordances of technology to help us form those meaningful connections. And so I'm going to be talking about 2 such interventions, spending most of my talk on the first intervention, biosignals, or systems that detect, display, and share biosignals like our heart rate with other people, which are well known to change according to our physical and our emotional responses, and therefore might promote deeper understanding of each other. And the second that I'm going to go into in the last third of the talk is integrating effort into communication through handcrafting in augmented reality. Essentially taking aspects of effort that you might put into handcrafting or handmade artifacts, which are long appreciated in the analog world, and bringing that into the digital realm. And so I'm going to start by describing my work with biosignals, which I did at both CMU and Snap. Now, sharing our biosignals is becoming more and more possible in today's world, where we have devices, wearable devices that have typically been designed to sense these data for self-tracking that actually now enable us to send them to other people. For example, we have the Apple Watch Digital Touch, where you can actually send vibrations of your heartbeat on your wrist. There's the Fitbit, where you can record heart rate during exercise and share that with your friends, as well as the Muse, which is this brain sensing headset that you can wear over your forehead, which allows you to share brain activity sensed during meditation on social media. And so my research describes this concept as expressive biosignals, or the use of sense physiological data like our heart rate or our brain activity as a new kind of social cue. I explore the potential for biosignals to promote social connection as this unique signal that comes from our bodies that could potentially represent more authentic and immediate reactions to our everyday experiences. And I led several projects to understand this potential for biosignals to affect communication, using the most common model for communication, where you have the sender who sends a message, in this case biosignals, to a receiver who can receive that message, view the biosignals, and then provide feedback back to the sender. So I'm going to briefly cover projects that go into different questions around the sender and receiver components, and do a deeper dive in specific ones based on what Aladdin had mentioned the group was originally interested in. But I'll just note I'm happy to provide details for any of the studies at the end. And so I'm going to start by talking on the sender side, focusing on why and how people express their biosignals to others. And so this can include their motivations behind expressing them and how they can meaningfully share them, especially when they're fairly personal and private data. So to see whether and how people would share their biosignals, I ran a field study where I built and deployed an Android app that enabled people to text their heart rate, which was recorded from the Mio Alpha 2 fitness band. And so you can see here that the app prompted people through notifications in their everyday context, asking them if they want to share their current heart rate with any of their contacts over text. And we also collected data through surveys and interviews at different points in the study to understand whether and how they shared through these texts. And we found that people express their biosignals as a way to express emotions and activities with each other. For example, as an emotional expression, this person sent her heart rate to a friend saying that she's feeling blue and implying that she might need help, using heart rate as a kind of indirect way to share her emotions. This person indicated her daily activities, sending her heart rate to her significant other just throughout the day as a commentary on what she was doing. And finally, some people shared their heart rate playfully, such as this person who shared even when the device faced technical issues and gave weird values. He actually thought it was very humorous and had one friend who would always comment, "It's very high, you're gonna die." And so this study shows that senders could connect with receivers by using their biosignals to disclose feelings and activities from the signal from their body, using text to kind of clarify what that number might be. But what happens when the person they're expressing to actually sees their biosignals? How does a receiver perceive someone else's biosignals? And so given the lab's interest in empathy, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this next study, mainly because based on prior works, I hypothesized that biosignals can affect our empathy for others. And I based this on empathy work from Batson and his colleagues, which suggests that inducing perspective taking or thinking about someone else's feelings can increase empathy. And so given that the work I just talked about suggests people express their biosignals to express their feelings, in this work, I investigated whether viewing those biosignals might help receivers think about that person's feelings. And so specifically, I proposed that the presence of biosignals, in this case, heart rate, could similarly increase empathy, focusing on two operationalizations of empathy. The first being emotional perspective taking, or the ability to infer someone else's feelings, hypothesizing that the presence of heart rate increases emotional perspective taking. And the second is empathic concern, or feelings of compassion or sympathy towards another person, which also can lead to pro-social behavior, like making donations to a related cause. And so I hypothesized that the presence of heart rate can increase empathic concern and therefore pro-social behavior. Second, I investigated how visualizing biosignals would affect closeness with another person. And so I based this on a prior work, which was a controlled experiment showing that heart rate is a very intimate cue. So when you listen to someone else's heart rate, it actually increases perceptions of intimacy with that person, kind of similar to the intimacy of gazing into someone else's eyes or standing close to them. And so based on this work, I propose that making these biosignals cues more noticeable through a representation would increase that closeness. And so I look at the impact of visualizing biosignals in the form of a graph, which is a fairly common representation of biosignals in consumer apps like fitness trackers. And I suggest that they can increase closeness compared to a less vivid representation like text. I also, so this includes interpersonal closeness, such as how related you feel to someone or how similar you feel to them, as well as social presence or the salience of another person. And so I conducted a vignette experiment to explore these hypotheses, and that was based on the previously mentioned empathy work by Batson and his colleagues, where people read a vignette story about a stigmatized group member or a socially discredited person. And in this case, it was a drug addict. And so we decided to focus on a stigmatized group member just to make a particularly strong case for the effects of empathy, given that people typically experience difficulties empathizing with them. And so drawing directly from the study, we asked people to read a transcript of an interview we conducted with a man named Jared, who was in jail for possession and sale of heroin. This was a fictional story, but we had for the study, this was a cover story where we said that we were trying to collect stories like this that we would share on a new online storytelling platform. And we were essentially trying to kind of match this to something that's already popular, shared online, such as Humans of New York, which is this project on social media where a photographer posts pictures of people in quotes from his interviews with them. So it's kind of trying to simulate that. And so we ran a between subjects experiment where we compared conditions where biosignals were present or not present, again, hypothesizing that the presence of biosignals will increase emotional perspective taking, empathic concern, and pro-social behavior. And we had 3 conditions, the first being no heart rate. So you just see a transcript in text of the interview. The second being a heart rate caption, where you see the interview alongside a caption that said that Jared's heart rate was elevated and had a number for it. And then we had a heart rate graph condition where we had the same caption, but we also included a little moving graph to represent Jared's heart rate. And so for the first 3 hypotheses to compare presence of biosignals, we compared the no heart rate condition against the average of the heart rate caption and heart rate graph conditions. For visualization, we only looked at the heart rate conditions since we were hypothesizing that visualizing heart rate as a graph compared to text would increase closeness and social presence. So we ran the study with 62 participants from Mechanical Turk, and we had roughly 20 people per condition. And we found from our one-way ANCOVA analysis that the presence of biosignals actually did increase empathy, specifically emotional perspective taking. So we measured emotional perspective taking by people's perceptions of Jared's emotions. And we found that with the heart rate conditions, there was significantly higher perceptions that Jared was nervous as well as less strong. However, we did not find any significant effects for empathic concern or pro-social behavior, so we were not able to replicate Batson's study. And we speculate that this is perhaps due to cultural shifts. So the original Batson study was done in 2002, and so the culture around drug addiction and our understanding of it has likely changed since then, and the empathic concern values were actually twice as high as what Batson saw in the low empathy conditions in his study. In terms of closeness, we found that visualizing biosignals as a graph did increase feelings of closeness, mainly in terms of how related people felt to Jared and how similar they felt to him. However, we did not find any effects for social presence or the realness of Jared. So we suspect this result might have been due to the representation of the graph A graph is fairly clinical looking compared to something like audio heartbeat, like in the study I mentioned earlier, or even the haptic vibration of a heartbeat might impact a sense of presence as well. And so coming back to the hypotheses, first for empathy, we found that the presence of heart rate can increase empathy in terms of emotional perspective taking, but we did not find any effects for empathic concern or prosocial behavior. And visualizing heart rate as a graph instead of as text increased interpersonal closeness in terms of how related and similar people felt to Jared, but it did not affect social presence. So to summarize, we found that people will empathize with and feel closer to a sender when they see their biosignals, even if they don't know the sender, even if they're a stigmatized group member. And so the work I've presented so far have focused on biosignals' impact on these kind of two separate components, the sender and the receiver side. So it's kind of isolating sending and receiving. And so building on these works, I next worked to understand how biosignals are used in two-way communication. So when both people have access to biosignals and share them with each other over time. And so this is a project I worked on with SNAP. I'm actually going to very briefly talk about it since I'm going to go even deeper into another project that builds on this work directly. So this will just be very quick where I just talk about Animo. So Animo is an app that we created for the Fitbit Versa smartwatch. It displays animos, or these little animated shapes that represent your mood from heart rate recorded on the Fitbit. So people could tap their Animo to send it to one other person who could then tap to send theirs back. And so we did a 2-week deployment study and found that Animo actually enabled a lightweight way for people to keep in touch with each other while they were apart. So for example, this one actually did support a sense of presence where people mentioned that the thing on their wrist felt like their partner and actually became a prompt to communicate. And sharing an Animo was kind of like sharing a moment with each other, particularly how they're feeling in that moment, and made people more aware of each other's feelings and had new conversations about those feelings. And so from Animo, we can see that people will use expressive biosignals in communication for lightweight connection in the form of presence and new moments and new conversations. And so altogether, Animo and these other works I've talked about show this potential for biosignals to help people connect with each other in different ways. But at the same time, they haven't really described the role that biosignals play in communication. And so in fact, we can already communicate our emotions and activities through verbal text, or even just sending one of 100 existing emojis. And so the studies I've discussed haven't really clarified the value of biosignals compared to our existing means of communicating without them. And so this is another project I did at SNAP, where we built this application for iOS called Significant Otter. And so this drew a lot from the design of Animo, but we created 2 versions of this application where one had biosignal sensing turned off and one had biosignal sensing turned on. And we explored how shifting between those 2 versions might, 1, affect communication and 2, affect feelings of connection. And so I'm going to show a short video to demonstrate how Significant Otter works. Just going to jump to YouTube here, since presumably the sound will be better.
Staying connected while you're apart can be difficult. Introducing Significant Otter, a lightweight, authentic way to stay in touch with your significant other, no matter the distance. Significant Otter uses biosignal data from your Apple Watch to sense how you're doing and let your partner know through your own personal otter. Your partner can stay up to date with you and send their own otter back. Our research shows that sharing sensed otters promotes easier and more open communication for couples. Staying connected while you're...
Tries to play it again. All right. So you can see that Significant Otter was an Apple Watch app for couples. So we decided to focus on couples based on the previous project I talked about, Animo, because they were actually the participants who were the most excited about this application. And so we saw some potential product, we saw product potential in the idea, and we felt that couples would be a good target population. And so we did actually release this on the App Store. I believe it should still be up if people want to try it themselves, if you have an Apple Watch and someone to use it with. We actually had 60,000 app installations, and we're featured on the App Store for Valentine's Day, as well as in Apple retail stores and on the Product Hunt Daily Digest. And so digging a little deeper into how significant otter worked, there were 15 total state animations, and so different otter animations to represent your current state. But we only showed a few at a time based on sensing. And so this was across like the feelings, activities, these kind of thinking of you animations and greetings. Sensing was only used for feelings and activities though. So we used biosignals and contextual data. But for biosignals in particular, heart rate, since we can only get whether people were high or low kind of energy and not necessarily the valence of the heart rate, we decided to show sets of similar states at a time. So for example, we would show excitement and anger at the same time, and then a user would select one of those to send to their partner. I'll note that thinking of you and greeting animations were always, we always showed at least one of them at random, mainly because you could be thinking of your partner or wanting to greet them really at any time during the day. To test significant otter, I ran a 1-month study with 20 couples, and I compared the sensing off version, which had no biosignal sensing, and we simply showed them random otters, to the sensing on version. And so this is the overview of the study, where we first started with onboarding, where we had people install the application, do a short demographic survey, and then they used it for 2 weeks before we interviewed them about their experience, and then updated them to the sensing on version, which they used for the last 2 weeks, after which we interviewed them again. And throughout the study, we also collected usage data and had them fill out daily surveys just to understand their perceptions throughout. And so I conducted a qualitative analysis of the mid and exit interview transcripts. I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but it was essentially a thematic analysis where I worked with the research team to group the data into different higher level themes. And I'll talk about 2 themes that we found based on the research questions on how shifting from sensing off to on affected people's communication and feelings of connection. And starting with communication, we found that with sensing turned on, biosignals actually made communication easier for people because it provided a clear pre-made message that people could simply tap to send to their partner and convey their feelings. This person mentioned how the app essentially knows exactly how you're feeling versus you having to look at it, because sometimes they don't even think about how they're feeling until they have to. So it became easier to send biosignals because they didn't have to think about it. Another person described the sensed otter as more straightforward because for the sensing off version, since they just got a random animation, they had to come up with their own crazy intricate meanings versus for sensing on, since it was tied to her heart rate, it became what they're feeling or what they were doing. One limitation we did notice among a few people though, is that it depended on their perceptions of accuracy, where people can have different subjective understandings of their own emotions. Some people were very confident in their emotions over what an app could sense. This person said, I feel like I know what I feel like, and this thing is just guessing based on my heartbeat, and I don't think that's accurate. So in summary, biosignals made communicating state easier by clarifying the meaning of the animation, so that could depend on perceptions of accuracy. And next, I'll talk about feelings of connection. We found that with sensing on, people felt that biosignals were the otters with biosignals were more authentic and representative of themselves, which helped them have more personal and open experiences with each other. For example, this person mentioned that they felt connected to their partner, even though they're not physically together, because the biosignals help them get a sense of their partner's actual bodily responses through the app. Another person mentioned that they became more open with their partner. They mentioned even though they're typically open, it's more like they become 100% honest compared to 95% honest, and that 5% can make a big difference. And so they said they felt more compelled to send a stressed otter instead of not wanting to look weak or put up a front. However, there were a few people who were concerned about agency, where they had some tensions in terms of whether it was truly them or if it was a system that was sending the message. So as I mentioned before, some people actually sent their otter without really thinking about their biosignals or what they meant. And this person actually noticed this, where in the second half with sensing on, they felt that they were just sending stuff based on whatever the watch read they felt. So it wasn't them taking the time and going through and putting in the effort to say that this is the one, like this is the otter that represents my feelings. And so it became almost impersonal, even though the app was reading off their personal data. So to summarize, when sensing was turned on, people felt that their otter state was more authentic and representative of them, which led to more honest communication and a feeling of presence. But at the same time, there were some people who were worried about the agency they had over what they communicated. So taking these results together, I propose that biosignals do bring value to communication, mainly in their ability to function as enhanced emojis. So without biosignals, it was essentially a shorter emoji or sticker or GIF keyboard because people were just selecting an animated otter sticker to send to their partner. One of the drawbacks of this style of communication is that it can confuse people that you're sending it to because emojis and stickers are known to have multiple possible meanings. With sensing on, though, it actually enhanced communication because people felt they were they can more easily send their state through the otter animations since it was backed by their data. So they knew it represented them and they felt that it was more authentic and more genuine. And actually, overall, most people preferred the sensing version for this benefit. At the same time, there are some challenges that designers need to keep in mind in order to achieve these benefits. And so this is a system that suggests how you feel. So it's essentially a form of AI-mediated communication where the system is giving you an emotion that you communicate to someone else. As you can imagine, blindly trusting a system like this can be dangerous, especially if it's just giving you negative emotions and making you feel a certain way. On the other hand, some people may not even engage with it because they have a very strong subjective understanding of their own emotions. And so they may never trust these type of systems, even if they do end up having high accuracy. At the same time, there is this question in terms of how much effort people were putting into sending their biosignals. Human effort's fairly important. If you can imagine, like handwritten letters are generally valued more than something like an automated system message. And so in this case, the biosignals were providing the message. And so some people felt that it lacked effort behind that would normally go behind making that message. And so biosignals on their own, while viewed as authentic, may also lose meaning if it lacks thought behind it. So to summarize, I talked about my expressive biosignals work, going into more detail on the empathy study and significant otter. And I showed how displaying biosignals like our heart rate can be a way to meaningfully connect with someone. And before I move on, I just want to mention one thing that our team was really proud of. We were able, this is an Apple App Store review where someone commented on significant otter that they're an OTR truck driver and not home much. But they were actually using this with their wife and they felt like it helped them feel closer to her, even though she was physically far away. And so they were actually really grateful that this app was existing to help them feel close in that way. And so we were really excited to kind of see that real positive impact on people. And given this value, we actually did pitch this to the rest of the team at Snap, and we ended up creating a Bitmoji version of the app called BFF that's also available on the App Store to check out. Now I'm going to spend the last part of my talk building on my findings in significant order by specifically focusing on that last question about effort. And so now I'm going to shift from biosignals to explore other means of engaging in effort, specifically how you might integrate meaningful effort and communication through handcrafting in AR. And just to provide some background, I'll start by pointing out that our digital communication is often very brisk and automated. For example, we have quick emoji reactions or the like button that are very common on social media. Automated messages, which I mentioned already, these are common on for email replies. And even apps like Snapchat that actually market themselves as the fastest way to share a moment. Now, while there are benefits to this kind of quick and efficient interaction, more interactions does not necessarily mean more meaningful interactions, where research suggests that social disconnection can actually be exacerbated by these kind of effortless connections. Now, why is effort so important? Well, effort can convey emotional impact and show that we care for someone else and subsequently help us maintain our relationships with them. And this is something we already do in the analog world. Like I already mentioned, if you can think of the last time someone wrote a letter for you, or someone handcrafted a gift or handmade food for you, you likely thought it was very meaningful. So inspired by the analog world, we explored what a handcrafted experience might be in the digital world. Designing for effort can be pretty tricky though, as you might imagine. You want to make sure you're effortful enough to show that you care, but also not so effortful that people don't want to engage because it's too much work. So drawing from prior work, we want to reduce what's called procedural effort, or the effort required to complete a task. So if your task, for example, is to send a message to someone, it might be, the procedural effort might be in opening the message app. Instead, we want to enhance personal effort, or what makes that task special for the recipient. And so in the messaging example, it would be thinking about something to say that the other person might like. And so personal effort, this type of effort is more associated with the analog handcrafting examples that I gave. And so together with a team of 3 interns at Snap, we explore the potential for personally effortful communication. We started with a 1-week design sprint where we created storyboards, lo-fi prototypes, and did some really quick user studies just to get initial reactions. And we decided to focus on AR specifically, mainly to leverage the physicality of AR, where you can we wanted to emulate that feeling of making something by hand, while also enabling more creative expression because you're overlaying something digital onto the physical world. And based on this design sprint, we created an app called Augie, which was a hi-fi prototype for effortful communication, which enabled people to invest effort into creating and sharing handcrafted AR experiences that were centered on a 3D bear. And so we call these experiences Augies, and they consisted of animating and decorating the bear and sending it to someone else. And so I'm going to step through the different features of Augie. So first we have this outfit where you can select an image to express and make your Augie bear more personal. You can animate the Augie by moving those 3 circles and make it jump and twirl by swiping on the phone. You could also add a partner bear, which you could animate alongside the main bear. You could also draw in 3D by moving your phone around in 3D space, and this could be used to create props for the bear. And you can add background music by searching for audio on iTunes. Finally, the user can review the Augie experience that they created and send it off to their partner on this little paper airplane by actually blowing wind onto their phone, so it would capture the audio. And then the partner would view the Augie in their own environment, as well as be able to review the behind the scenes of how it's created in order to get a sense of what effort was put behind it. We conducted a 2-week field study to deploy Augie with 15 participants and understand their experiences with it. So this is pretty similar to Significant Otter in that we collected data through interviews, daily surveys, and data from the app. And we did a qualitative analysis similar to Otter to understand whether the meaningfulness of handcrafting would translate to the digital world. And so I'll talk about 2 themes around how the design of Augie encouraged effort as well as its social effects. So we found that that the design of Augie helped encourage effort by framing it as a personal gift. So people took care in not only creating the Augie experiences, but also wrapping and unwrapping it like a gift. For example, this person mentions how it's like you want to make a gift, you take more effort to create something and send something that's caring for your partner. Another person highlighted the feature where you blow wind to send the Augie, which they felt was very intentional. And it's different from a text message because you get a considerate moment, like, oh yes, I'm sending off the little thing. So it's kind of similar to the consideration of picking and wrapping a gift. And on the receiving side, people mentioned how it was like seeing a little story unfold, and it's a surprise that's almost like unwrapping a present. You get a little bit of suspense and wondering what's going to happen here. We also found that design of Augie encouraged people to invest effort because the craft was situated in the environment through AR. So the bear would interact with their surroundings and their personal objects, which helped them tell new stories beyond physical limits because you are overlaying digital effects on the physical world. For example, this person talked about how their friend moved to a new city and it's raining outside, and they actually made the bear walk around the grass, which they couldn't do because it was raining, but the bear could. And they also talked about how the bear could jump on the table, which they couldn't do. And so they're essentially using Augie to tell a story that they wouldn't otherwise be able to just record themselves doing. At the same time, some people eventually struggled to put in effort at a frequent rate because being creative all the time can be really hard. This person actually said they ran out of ideas and they ran out of new scenery, mainly because they're just sitting in front of their desk every day. And so they didn't get any inspiration to create and send any new Augies. So to summarize, the design of Augie encouraged effort by framing it like a gift-like craft that could go beyond reality, though it did need a certain amount of creativity to help keep it going. So next I'll talk about the effects of digital handcrafting, where we saw that the proxy of the digital bear helped people feel free to express and share their authentic selves and ultimately be very personal in what they were crafting. This person mentions how Augie allowed them to just be themselves because you're just using it to create something for your partner that's meaningful compared to something like Snapchat filters, which are applied to your own face and make you look like someone that you've never met. Another person highlighted that it's the imperfections of Augie that are important because you're not creating a super polished or complex animation. Because it's imperfect, it actually feels more endearing and personal and can help you express yourself more. Interestingly, though we designed for effortful communication, we found that it was actually lightweight enough that people still wanted to engage. And this helped them kind of send lightweight thinking of you Augies or wish you're here Augies that help them feel like they're present with each other. One person actually described it more like a postcard, where they said it's not quite an instant message. It's okay if your partner checks it after a while. And when they do, it's actually a very vivid message compared to something like WeChat or Facebook. Another person mentioned how it's kind of like a group photo, and you might have a friend who's missing and you hold up your hand and you're essentially like, well, your friend should be here, your head should be where my hand is. And so in Augie, where you can move the bears around together and make them hug, it helped them get a sense of connection, in this case with their sister, as if they were sitting together in person somewhere. And finally, participants described how this actually helped them get closer. They mentioned that with the effort they put in, they felt like they appreciated each other's time more and their interactions more, and even talked more because of it. So to summarize, we found that there were effects on personal and lightweight connection, despite the required effort to create and craft Augies. And so what are some implications for designing meaningful effort? And so earlier I talked about this challenge of balancing personal and procedural effort. And so one implication is to mask the heaviness of effort with playfulness. So using fun animations or cute characters to make that procedural part feel less like work and something much more enjoyable. And this is something that's actually done in game design research. The example shown here is a game that masks the seriousness of cybersecurity by using a playful storyline. Another implication is to consider ways to bridge physicality and effort. And so bridging by bringing in meaningful physical rituals like the process of gift wrapping. Hybrid gifting, for example, actually combines physical and digital experiences in this way, where the example shown here is called Rough Mile, and it's actually a personalized music playlist that you can create for another person who can only access it by walking to specific locations. And finally, I didn't mention this as much earlier, but I just wanted to point out that a lot of the reason people were able to tell that their partner invested effort was because of those behind the scenes recordings that came with the Augie. And so this also just highlights the importance of being explicit in the effort you're putting in and not always just implicitly expecting people to know the effort behind it. So to summarize, Augie presents a different approach to social connection over technology by promoting effortful communication through handcrafting and AR. Taking these results together, you can see these are two interventions for that essentially promote authentic communication for social connection, but they do so on this kind of spectrum of low effort and agency to high effort and agency. So on the low end, biosignals were able to act as a very authentic and intimate cue because it's a signal that comes from our body. So it's harder to control or harder to fake. At the same time, because of that lack of control, it can feel impersonal or even automated if the system's doing it for you. On the other hand, digital handcrafting can be very personal because you're putting all that effort in and deciding what it should look like for your partner. You get a lot of agency over what it looks like, but at the same time, that can require skills and creativity to be able to craft something that's meaningful enough to send. So ultimately, future work in this area will need to explore the right balance between these different dimensions of effort and agency. And actually, some of my last work at Snap was doing that, trying to explore this balance this desire for personalization and craftiness, but also not requiring too many skills. And I'm going to very briefly show this project here. It's not a complete project, but I just wanted to mention it to give you a sense of potential next directions this kind of research can take. And so we call this Time Capsule, which was a collaborative crafting application for keepsaking. It was actually based on real time capsules, which we imagine people would be more familiar with compared to animations. And so time capsules are essentially like, imagine like you and a group of friends or other people might collect meaningful objects or photos to represent memories, and you put them in a box and then bury it in the ground. And then several years later, you might dig it up to reflect on those memories. And so here's how we envisioned this version of a time capsule working. So you might have a group of friends going on a trip, and on this trip, they collaboratively craft an AR scrap box, where this digital box that they can add pictures to the outside. On the inside of the box, they can add virtual objects to represent kind of meaningful things that they found on their trip. And then like analog time capsules, they can virtually bury this in some location and then dig it up sometime in the future to look at it and reflect on it. And this is just a lo-fi prototype of how we imagine this looking, where you have this kind of this virtual box with pictures on the outside, and then you can open it to see cutouts of meaningful virtual objects on the inside. That would also have associated audio to describe why they're meaningful.
Get that ice cream and found this cool watch.
And we have a semi-working Snapchat lens. You can see it in the GIF to the right. Essentially, you would have this 3D box, the time capsule, that you can add images to the outside and then open it actually using an open hand gesture, and then add cutouts of virtual objects to the inside of that box that you can then add audio to. And so the goal had been to release this publicly as a product, kind of similar to Significant Otter. Unfortunately, we weren't able to complete the project before I left Snap. But if you do have Snapchat, you can open it to the camera and then use the Snap code if you want to check out what the lens would look like. And so here's a summary of all the work that I showed today on expressive biosignals and digital handcrafting in AR, where I showed how these two different approaches can be used to foster social connection over technology. And before I end, I just want to talk about really quickly about the Global Tech Applied Research Team. And so while I didn't present any work from this team, I did want to point out that we are an AR VR team. And so, and we kind of broadly explore a variety of topics within AR VR, mainly just connected to the workplace. So anywhere from visualization to collaboration, well-being, and so on. And so if you're interested, check out our team homepage. We are hiring throughout the year for full-time. We will hire for summer interns starting later in the year. And so if you're interested, definitely apply or feel free to reach out to me. I also mentioned earlier, I'll be at Kai. So if you'd like to meet one-on-one and also talk in more detail about the team, I'm happy to do that as well. Otherwise, that's it. Thank you so much for listening.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Fannie. That was great work and different scale of a lot of things between high effort and also the biosignals and whatever. So now we enter the question and answer. If anyone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand. I guess I see Bai has a question, please.
Yeah, thanks, Aladdin. And thank you, Fannie, for your presentation. A huge fan of your work, actually. I've been referring to Animal and Significant Otter a lot for some of my works, actually. So
Awesome,
I have two questions. Yeah, I have two questions. So the first being, so you shared some findings from Animal and Significant Otter. I was wondering what are your thoughts about how these findings can transition to an XR social space? I understand that you're also working in the metaverse right now, isn't it? So some of these animations, for example, how they're powered by biosignals. Can you share some thoughts on how they work in XR space, in your opinion?
Sure. So I did do some exploration in VR specifically. I think I do have slides I can share. Oh, yes. So I had a few experiments I did during my PhD where I just wanted to show biosignals in VR as a way to help people just communicate and take advantage of kind of the immersive visualizations you could have. And one idea was to actually take more of the storytelling approach, like given that you're in this kind of immersive setting and stories have been explored in VR before. And I wanted to basically plug in heart rate data and generate or create some kind of story that represented that heart rate data. And so this is a project that we were working on right when the pandemic happened. So actually, unfortunately, wasn't fully complete. But some of the ideas we had were to basically take these very high emotional events, like a marriage proposal, and represent that as like a little interactive story where you can see someone's heart rate changing as you watch the kind of the proposal happening. And so in this case, it was, we actually took someone posted on social media, like their heart rate during a proposal. And so we matched heart rate with the height of the virtual environment. So it basically go up as the heart rate went up and so on. And also annotated it with like key moments, like when the proposal happened, or for this person, enjoying ice cream was very important. So that was another part of the story. And we also tried it with negative experiences as well. So this was someone who posted about having a bad date with someone and how their heart rate went really high then. And so we tried, for this one, we were a little bit more experimental in the story where it wasn't very linear, but we wanted people to basically use this fortune teller kind of animation to pick a part of the story. And then it would visualize, like, for example, like fire to represent like when their heart rate was going up because of something that, well, in this case, they were being mansplained to. And so they wanted to so it was to visualize that. And so those were just some of the examples of how you might visualize biosignals in VR. Would definitely love to do more work in this space, and definitely think there could be more work in this space. But here's just a few to help illustrate it.
Yeah, thank you. And for my second question, so you mentioned biosignals, but I realized that most of the exploration is using heart rate.
Yes.
Have you considered other forms of biosignals, or have you not, and may I know why?
Yeah, I did do a study on brain activity. I'll just show briefly. Okay, so I had these different visualizations for brain activity where I just wanted to see, like, because it's heart rate is something that people are fairly familiar with. It's like there's a lot of cultural understandings. You can feel your heartbeat and feel your heart rate change. But brain activity is kind of this whole other thing. It's like hard to imagine brain activity. And so I explored how we might visualize the different brain waves to represent and express your biosignals. But this, I found with brain activity, people were kind of, it was harder for them to interpret because they weren't exactly sure like what they're looking at, like even just looking at the lines. If we gave them a definition for the different waves, it was a little bit harder compared to heart rate. Though they did end up making some kind of emotional and cognitive interpretations. But the other thing was also there's this sense of like, oh, like you're reading my mind was also a concern. Because even though it's like they may not understand like the data that well, it's still this feeling that like, oh, it's like my brain waves and now you can see them was another concern. But really probably the biggest limiting factor and the reason why I didn't go further this direction was the hardware. So Muse headset you can only use for 3 hours, and I wanted to do kind of everyday context to be able to share that. And so it wasn't as feasible to equip people with these kind of headsets compared to having them just wear smartwatches that already sense these data.
Yeah, I suppose EEG is not the most sort of wearable platform, and also the noise sort of also increases a lot of the effort to go through all the signals and try to understand what it's trying to convey to the other users. Yeah, thanks for the reply. So yeah, actually, just to give some context, I'm actually currently working on the idea of empathic avatars within the XR space. So it's possible I would love to connect with you in the future as well to sort of discuss maybe potential collaborations. I'll be at Kai, so maybe we can also meet up quickly for some further discussions then.
Great, yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to hear more about your work.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Pai. Question from Gan.
Yep, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, Fannie. I think that's a great range of variant works that you've been doing. Very interesting. At our lab, we are also quite interested in using biosensors to detect emotional status. I think one of the common challenges is using biosensors. It's quite straightforward to tell the arousal, but it's very hard to tell about valence. Do you have any insights or your own approaches how to overcome this, or is there a certain way to figure out valence with a limited sensors that we can use? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. So for valence, in significant otter, I actually just avoided it. So I decided rather than, so for animal, we just gave them one state. So one animation at a time. And we actually just randomized valence. So we were just like, okay, it'll just be either positive or negative at this time. And that was confusing to people and they didn't agree with it. And so that's why for significant otter, we showed multiple otter animations at once. And so the advantage of this was that even though we didn't show them like a singular state, this actually helped them reflect on their own state and think about what their emotion might be. And I think that kind of improves the collaboration that they could be having with the system versus that whole issue of like the system like telling them how they feel. I think it could be improved anymore, of course, improved more, of course, given the results that I found. But I think part that was important in helping them have that little bit of reflection for some people before sharing their emotions. That being said, there is like the whole field of effective computing that's exploring this even more. I believe there are other kinds of sense information that you combine with biosignals, so not just biosignals by themselves, whether that's, for example, like audio in terms of changes in your voice intonation and so on, whether it's like other kinds of contextual data that you can provide. And so there's, I think, definitely like research heading in that direction. But for me, I was more focused on perceptions. And I think having the ability for someone to think about their own valence actually worked out well in my study.
Very interesting. I think that's quite interesting approach to encourage the user to actually think about their own emotions. I think that's quite interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gun. Question from Tama.
Hi, Fanny. Thank you for a wonderful talk. It was, as Pai said, we used to refer your works, or most of my new PhD works are based on more inspiration from your prior works. So thank you for,
thank you.
and looking forward for all the future works as well. So I have two questions. The one is like, when you try to design like the otter or animo or the bear, Augie, so how do you come up with a design decision to choose animal expressive agents? And also I want like these agents are also how humans felt is like they become an agency to share the emotion through via that animal. So and they also, now that you're combining biosignals, they also try to represent how I'm felt. So this is one question I would like to ask or explore is, can an intelligent, that animal can act as its own intelligent agent that tries to combine improve the communication between two people based on each other's biosignals? Yeah. So based on these, these are the first two questions I want to ask.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your questions. So the first one was about how why I designed those specific avatars. And so for we started with, so Animo was kind of the first time we approached this, and we were going for something very simple because this was on the Fitbit VersaWatch, and so there's only so much we could do, and so we decided to go for a more abstract representation of emotions. So we were inspired by I don't know if you've seen that like video from like a psychology experiment, but it's basically like, I think it was like squares versus triangles, where it's like these animated squares bullying a triangle or the other way around. And it's very emotional. So even having just these little shapes, because they could be that emotional, we decided to do something similar where we use just a circle and a triangle. And we did actually test the different animations we created through a mechanical Turk's array just to make sure that they were appropriately representing emotions as well. But once we ran that study, a lot of the feedback we got from people was that they wanted an animal. They were like, oh, we just want a little Tamagotchi on my watch, a little digital pet. And that's why we ended up going the route of an animal. Partly also just seeing like the product potential I mentioned, where we were going for something like maybe even more cute and engaging. And so that's where the otter came in. And we actually hired an animator to create those otters for us. And then given kind of the success of otter, like we had a lot of people in the study who really, really just loved the otters and how cute they were. That's kind of why we kept going with Augie. But with a bear specifically, because we were inspired by teddy bears, as teddy bears is like something you might like, at least in the past, or maybe still with Build-A-Bear and so on, like create and knit and like give to another person, or like crochet, like there's a lot of those like crochet little bears. And so that's kind of the inspiration for why we did an Augie as a bear. For your second question, I think that's a really interesting point, like whether the animal itself can be an agent. I think there is sometimes this question of like, is this animal like me, or is this animal my pet? And I think it ranged for some people, like where like they felt like it did represent their partner, they did feel like they were personally expressing themselves. But as I mentioned, for animal some people just wanted like a digital pet. So I think in that digital pet sense, like it could be really interesting to explore if that pet or like the animal like could do more than just like be sent back and forth. I think people in the study mentioned they wanted to like play games with each other using the animal and things like that. So I definitely think that could be a really interesting direction.
Thank you, Fannie. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Awesome questions, Tamil. Thank you. Question from Mark.
Oh, yes, thanks. I just had two questions. The first experience you showed where you were sharing heart rate on empathy with the stories, and you just had a heart rate graph. Was that just a static graph, or did you have an animation, or is it just a picture of the graph?
It was an animation.
Okay.
I actually recorded my own heart rate and just showed the peaks. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. So I just your results sound really interesting, but it sounded like you didn't get a high. So there's no difference in social presence, but I'm just wondering if that might be because there wasn't any live interaction with another person. It was just showing that there. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. So I think actually the study itself used text plus the moving graph. So there's a couple of things, like it could be that the graph itself, maybe it was a moving graph, but it's pretty slow moving. And we actually purposely did not have a lot of change, like variation in the graph. It was pretty neutral. And so potentially like having something more dynamic might affect their feelings of presence. But potentially another reason could be the fact that we use the graph itself. So actually in the slide I'm showing right now, I did explore different kinds of representations. This was for brain activity, but I think the same kind of idea applies here, where certain representations were more, might affect feelings of presence more. So like with a graph, if it's just kind of slow moving like this from right to left, versus this one was an ambient light that actually changed according to the brain activity. But you can imagine it could similarly change according to heart rate. I think that kind of visualization might have more of a effect on presence, especially because it's more physical. It's like a physical light in your environment. So I think potentially the representation might be important as well.
Okay, and I had one follow-up question, especially for the later pieces that you showed. I was just really curious about the prototyping tools you used. So you showed, the prototype of the kind of memory box, and then of course you made the significant order and the Augie. So from a design and prototyping experience, what type of tools do you use to rapidly prototype projects like that?
Sure, yeah. So I'm just gonna bring up the slide so I can talk through these. Yeah, so for Augie and Significant Otter were both iOS apps. And Time Capsule was a Snapchat lens. And so we use Lens Studio. For Time Capsule, we use ARKit for ARKit for Augie. Significant Otter, this was on the Apple Watch. So we were mainly prototyping on the Apple Watch. Animo was the Fitbit Versa. So this was primarily JavaScript-based prototype. And the heart rate narrative with the graph, that was just also JavaScript on a web application. And then the heart rate texting app was Android application with the Mio Alpha 2 wristband.
But I'm just in terms of, like, for example, with the Augie, did you just go straight to the in studio and start building in that, or did you do some sketching or some other tools before you actually got to the point of doing anything?
Yes. Let me bring up another slide. Oh, not this one. Yes. So we did
Oh, here we go. Sure.
Yeah, just design sprint to explore different prototypes prior to going to iOS. And we actually had this big debate as to whether we would do Snapchat Lens or iOS. Snapchat Lens partly because we were at Snap, so we want to take advantage of kind of the technology and the ability to just put up the lens afterwards. But ultimately, like iOS, we felt like would be able to, we would have more flexibility in terms of all the features we wanted, and there were a lot for Augie. But in terms of exploring it, we range from like the lo-fi kind of storyboard type prototypes to this was an intern's exploration using WebAR and actually playing around with this particular one was like, how should we send the Augie to someone else? And so we had ideas like a champagne bottle that might like pop the bear open to another person, or it might go on a rocket ship to someone else. And so we did do prototyping here just to get a sense of like what that might look like physically in our environment as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's great. And I'm sorry I have to jump off another meeting now, but that was a really great talk. It'd be good to catch up when you're at Kai as well.
Yeah,
so
that sounds
that's
great.
great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mark. Any other question? I have one question from my side. Thank you, Fannie, for this work. I'm interested to hear from you. So it's actually twofold question. One is you mentioned you use heart rate. Or did you use any other, I guess, biosignals, like for example, heart rate variability or the ECG values or SpO2, or do you see a value in using them? I don't know if they were available at that time or the devices you used. That's, I guess, maybe I will ask this question first and then last second one later.
Yeah, so I did primarily use heart rate, mainly because that was like the most widely available biosignal in terms of being able to get equipment and what people would be able to share with each other. I did consider heart rate variability at one point, but that one was not available. And so I think the Apple Watch, I think had something, but you had to have your finger on the watch for at least like 30 seconds, or there was some limitation like that. And so that wasn't feasible for kind of our field study where we wanted people to have these like lightweight, like tap interactions with each other. At one point, I also used the E4, which came out of media. Yeah. And that one was just definitely has enabled you to collect a lot more data. Like you can use skin conductance as well, which I was interested in particular since it's been used for stress. But that one, it's geared more towards I think like scientific, like medical research as well. And so just the cost wasn't feasible for us to deploy it in our field study. And so those were some options, but definitely we wanted to take advantage of like these consumer grade wearables like the Apple Watch. And even for a significant otter, we recruited people who already had the Apple Watch. For the first study with Mio Alpha 2 and the heart rate texting, we bought the Mio Alphas, but they were fairly inexpensive. So we were able to run that kind of study with the 13 participants we did. And so those were some of the reasons why I didn't explore as many biosignals, but I do definitely think they would be interesting because definitely like they would provide like heart rate's only one form of data and it only gives you like up and down in terms of your heart rate. So it'd be great to understand more signals, to combine potential signals. Potentially people had different perceptions of signals. Like I mentioned with brain activity, some people thought you were reading your mind versus like something like heart rate. I had one person mention how it's like feeling someone's heartbeat, which is a very intimate thing. Skin conductance is because it's related to sweat that people might associate that a lot more with something like nervousness. So I think it would definitely be interesting to explore more variety and also compare them.
That's great thought, yes. And This is probably, well, I guess I wanted to ask, you mentioned in your spectrum you had two ends of the spectrum. One is with high level involvement, I guess, where high effort where in creating the handcraft and these kind of things, and the other one is using the heart rate but less effort and less agency. I know you mentioned after that the time capsule, but do you think there will be a combination of these where the high effort can be done with heart rate or with physiological sensing?
Yeah, so definitely, I think with biosignals, actually the first study I ran with texting got closer to that part, because here with significant otter, we gave them just an otter animation, and so they just had to tap to send it, and so the message was just the animation itself. But you can imagine something that would be more effortful would be if we force them to think about it more, kind of like I was mentioning before. One person actually liked that you didn't have to think about it, but then another person was like, oh, but I didn't think about it at all. So I think prompting them to consider their feelings more and actually encourage them to put that effort in to think about this feeling and think about how they want to express it could be one way to have that kind of effort with biosignals. And you can even imagine that combined with handcrafting, like maybe you get certain set of tools or features available due to biosignals, like you have like a red paintbrush or something. And now with that tool, you have to create something to express whatever you think that biosignals mean. So yes, definitely, I think there could be a way to explore these kind of effortful approaches that include biosignals as well.
That's good. Thank you so much. I have lots more questions, but I guess for the sake of time and appreciating your effort as well. So thank you very much for talking to us. Thank you everyone for being here. Look forward to see what next you will work on.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me here and for all the great questions. Again, please reach out to me if you'd like to meet in person at CHI. I'd love to learn more about all of your work. And also feel free to reach out if you're interested in JP Morgan. Happy to talk about that as well. Thank you all.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye.